Yasmin, how was it getting up early with us for a few days?
You know, I did it for 3.5 years on MSNBC for folks that didn't necessarily know. So it was just kind of a flashback, but it's been so fun to be here. You're going to miss me, right?
I am. Okay. I am. It's been so much fun to have
It's been so fun.
Have some
Hopefully
girl power
you'll have me back at one point if Joe decides to take off. But I know he doesn't like to take much vacation.
I know
Neither
that's
of you two do.
Yeah, but no, it's been so much fun to have you. Thanks for being here. We will start this hour with that news of a potential Pfizer booster shot.
The company is also working to develop another shot targeting the rapidly spreading Delta variant. The FDA and the CDC, they've not endorsed any booster shots yet, but they also haven't ruled one out. In a joint statement, they said, quote, "We are prepared for booster doses if and when the science demonstrates that they are actually needed." NBC News national correspondent Miguel Almaguer has more on just how quickly Pfizer is looking to get a third dose into people's arms.
Pfizer says a booster shot, a third dose of its current vaccine, could offer Americans 5 to 10 times more protection against COVID. Given 6 months after the second dose, Pfizer believes those inoculated would be highly protected against the Delta variant, which is now exploding across the U.S. The company expects to deliver new data to the FDA within weeks and is also working to develop a Delta-specific version of its vaccine. It comes as new COVID cases and hospitalizations both climb at a dangerous pace. Some hospitals are now in the middle of their most dire days.
The competition for beds is higher now than it was during the peak last year.
Perhaps the nation's new epicenter, the Delta variant, is now fueling over 90% of cases in parts of Missouri. With the federal surge response team on the ground, 93% of COVID patients in one ICU are on ventilators.
We're seeing some younger population become very ill. We see patients becoming more ill quicker than we did before.
I'm so glad that's over.
Though vaccines are effective against Delta, the unvaccinated are fueling the spike. With a third of adult Americans not yet inoculated, researchers at Georgetown say these 5 under-vaccinated clusters of the country could become a breeding ground for new variants, putting the rest of the nation at risk.
That was NBC's Miguel Almaguer reporting. And as Pfizer and Moderna get to work on their booster shots, it is important to keep in mind that the FDA will have the final say on whether people will need one. Pfizer is also expected to release data that shows immunity can, in fact, decline 6 months after being fully vaccinated.
Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor and our friend, Dr. Natalie Azar, to walk us through the science behind booster shots. Good morning, Dr. Azar. So first, I'm hoping I would love if you could give us some context, because we've talked so much about vaccines, so much about shots, and just kind of remind us here. I mean, we do get the flu shot every year, that type of thing. So, this is not anything that necessarily means something is wrong, I don't think. So just walk us through that, but also what this means for those who've gotten the Pfizer vaccine. And could those who receive the Moderna or J&J vaccines expect one in the future? Because obviously we know that we all just got whatever shot was available here. So what does it mean for everyone?
Exactly. So here's kind of like the overall theme for you guys this morning, is that the possibility that we will need a booster shot is definitely out there. But when and in whom is still the big unanswered question. And those questions were not answered by the Pfizer report or their statement released yesterday. Essentially, what they told us was that if you give an individual who's received the 2-dose regimen of the Pfizer vaccine, you give them a third dose. Okay, so you have a 5 to 10-fold higher neutralizing antibody titer. That is expected, right? Every time you boost with a vaccine, you're going to get this, correlative rise in the antibody titer. But here's the kicker. We don't know. There's no evidence right now. We'll see if they have anything to show us. There's no evidence right now that if you have been fully vaccinated in the U.S. with any of the 3 currently available vaccines, that you've lost your immunity. We think that is still durable, and that includes Moderna and J&J. The big question will be, our thinking will change about this once we start to see breakthrough infections with Delta that are landing people in the hospital, okay, not just mild illness, but in the hospital. Right. I want to know whether or not you get a breakthrough infection with Delta. Do you get long COVID? We don't have data on that. And probably the most important thing is, if you've been vaccinated, can you transmit the Delta virus to somebody else? Those are big unanswered questions. Right. When those things start shifting, it might be time for a booster.
So let's talk about timing here on a couple different aspects, right? So when would we get that type of information? When would we start to see that type of information? And a lot of folks in this country started to get these vaccines back in December. That means we're beyond those 6 months that Pfizer is talking about. And by the way, those are exposed healthcare workers. Those are doctors and nurses on the front lines. Should they be worried?
So, well, let me give you a little personal anecdote. You know, we've reported on this show also that we are one of many centers that are studying the durability and the vaccine response in healthy individuals as well as in people who are immunocompromised, right? So everything that I'm saying really applies to individuals who are under the age of 65 and don't have any other medical conditions or on medications that could theoretically dampen the immune response. The issue, I just had my 6-month antibody titer checked on Tuesday. I was trying to get the results before today's shows, but unfortunately they're not available yet. But here's the thing, even if we see antibody levels decline, and this is so important, the durable immunity is not really related to antibody titers. It is very, very much a function of two other parts of your immune system, the T cell immunity and the B cell memory. And these things are not being discussed enough, frankly, by the vaccine makers from Pfizer. They're not studied in commercial tests. So, people need to feel very confident that if they did get the vaccine, there is very likely to be this other arm of the immune system that is giving them protection. And to your point, Yasmin, well, it's really real world data. A really important point that I want to make is that the CDC right now is not tracking mild or asymptomatic breakthrough cases with Delta or any variant. And this is really important because we do need to know if people are getting mild infection from Delta again, because can you transmit in that instance? Can you get long COVID? We don't have that data. We only have the data on severe breakthrough cases. But basically, it's just time will tell. We have laboratory data. How are the antibodies doing in the blood? We have clinical data, and then we have real world data. And all of that takes time to accumulate really and sift through and interpret before we can start telling people it's time to booster.
So, Dr. Azar, let's kind of keep in context the two things that we're talking about here, which is the potential booster shot, and now we're also talking breakthrough cases. So as people start hearing, okay, hey, I got Pfizer, to Yasmin's point, about 6 months ago. They're saying maybe 6 months you need a shot, or what? It's basically like I'm no longer vaccinated. No, you're telling us that you still have some protection here. So if you could be getting those breakthrough cases, and you're saying that the CDC is not tracking those mild ones, just explain to people what could potentially happen to them. I mean, it's just a very mild case of COVID, especially as we're hearing symptoms are changing, almost feels like allergies, almost feels like a sinus infection. And then what do people need to do to protect others, though? Like, what needs to be reminded here? Getting tested, staying home, what is it?
Well, that's the thing. And so these are such good, you guys have really good questions this morning. But, I think that we might be shifting into this place where we all need to start to get very comfortable with the idea that COVID is probably not going away. And, when we get the flu shot and we encourage people to get the flu shot, we don't necessarily promise them it's going to prevent the flu. In fact, it's only 40 to 60% protective or effective in a good year. But we do tell them that if they get the flu shot, they're probably going to have milder illness and they won't end up in the hospital. And I think that's kind of the narrative. I think we got very, not complacent, but, so excited about 90% effective, like as if we're never going to get sick with COVID. But to your point, if you've been vaccinated and get sick, even with a bad variant, do you stay out of the hospital and do you prevent transmission to other people? I think those are the two biggest questions. And of course, do you not get long COVID? Because that's really, really huge. And if all of those things are true, then everybody should feel very confident that they are protected at this point.
We could talk for another hour because I got like 20 more questions, but we don't have the time. Dr. Azar, until next time. Thank you, Dr. Azar. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We can't wait to hear about your results, by the way.
Let's get to the latest on Tropical Storm Elsa, which is sweeping across the Northeast.
New York City is already seeing some serious flooding with pools forming at subway stations. Wait till you see this video. Tornado warnings have been issued and more rain is on the way.
Let's get a check at all of that and your morning news now, a weekend weather as well with Bill Cairns. Bill, good to see you this morning. Wow, some images coming out of the Northeast yesterday, to say the least. Folks literally up to their knees, up to their waists with water in subway stations throughout New York City. Not a place you want to be around 5 p.m. yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was ugly. And just for the record, the rain in New York City yesterday was more like tropical Florida rain. We had a stalled front. That wasn't from Elsa, actually. The rain this morning is from Elsa. So I think the rain yesterday is going to do a lot more damage than what we're seeing out there today. So the storm is currently located just south of Long Island. The winds have never been that impressive with this storm. They're not that impressive right now. None of these wind gusts are strong enough to do any significant damage, or really any damage for that matter. So it's really a flooding story is what we're going to watch. So the latest from the Hurricane Center, they did increase it to 50-mile-per-hour winds, but the center is about maybe 40, 50 miles south of Islip right now, off the coast of Atlantic City, and it's going to head over areas of Massachusetts. I think Cape Cod's one of the only areas that could see some gusts above 40 miles per hour and the possibility of some power outages. The legacy of this storm is going to be how fast it leaves today. New York City is almost done with the rain. By 9 a.m., even half of Long Island's done with the rain. Boston, it looks like by about 2 p.m., 3 p.m., you are done with all your heavy rain. And then even Maine should be done by about 8 p.m. this evening. So we have about 12 more hours to watch this storm, and then we'll be done with it. If there's going to be any issues today, it would be with the heavy rain. Flood watch for about 41 million people, locally up to 6 inches as possible. And then we're going to turn all our attention this weekend out west. 95% of the West is now in drought. This time last year, only 40%. The drought is so much worse right now than this time last year. And how about Death Valley this weekend? So the hottest temperature ever recorded on the planet was in Death Valley, 134 degrees over 100 years ago. This weekend, it's going to come close. I don't think we're going to get there. But look at this forecast for Death Valley. 129, 130, 130. That's crazy.
Oh my
and we're going to
goodness.
set numerous record highs in areas of the West. Vegas, by the way, all-time hottest temperature is 117. Their forecast is 116. So this is going to be extreme. And here's all the areas that could see record highs as we go throughout today. It goes to tomorrow, guys. And as we've been saying, this heat wave is just endless. I mean, even into early next week, Vegas is going to be well above normal.
Oh, Bill, we've been talking about this, it feels like, for weeks. This is crazy. All right.
And, yeah, there's no signs it's going to stop, guys. Yeah.
Wow. All right,
Thanks,
thank
Bill.
you. We'll see you next hour. President Biden has announced that the U.S. military operation in Afghanistan will conclude on August 31st, bringing an end to America's longest ever war. In a speech yesterday, the president defended his decision to pull out of the country and said it was up to the people of Afghanistan to determine their future.
The United States did what we went to do in Afghanistan, to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11 and deliver justice to Osama bin Laden. We did not go to Afghanistan to nation build. And it's the right and the responsibility of the Afghan people alone to decide their future and how they want to run their country.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now from Washington, and our Pentagon and national security correspondent Courtney Cubie is also with us. Thank you both for being here this morning. Monica, I will start with you and some of that defense that we just heard there from the president. How has he said that he's come to this decision to withdraw troops even earlier than expected, as we're hearing about these concerns that the Taliban is making these advances? We've been talking about women and girls in the country. What is he saying more? Tell us more than just that soundbite about doing this earlier.
Well, when the president announced his plans for withdrawal back in April, he set a target date for the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. But then we saw, in his own words, that he considers speed as safety. So that is why he had such a swift drawdown. And more than 90% was complete by yesterday when he made this announcement. So the bulk of the work is already done in Afghanistan. But the president essentially defending a position he has held for a while now, which is that there was no military option left in Afghanistan. And he said he didn't want to send another generation, essentially, of young men and women to go fight an unwinnable war, in his view. Take a listen to how he also defended the timing here.
The status quo was not an option. Staying would have meant U.S. troops taking casualties. American men and women back in the middle of a civil war. I will not send another generation of Americans to war in Afghanistan with no reasonable expectation of achieving a different outcome.
President Biden did also answer some outstanding questions about what's going to happen to a lot of the Afghan nationals, thousands of interpreters, drivers, engineers in the country who helped the U.S. over the last 2 decades. They're trying to process some of those special immigrant visas a little more quickly than in the past, hoping thousands can be relocated to some third-party countries, perhaps in Central Asia, but some may be coming to the United States as well, Savannah.
So much to keep watching for there, Monica. Courtney, now to you. So you've seen the Taliban make these rapid advances in recent days. The president said in this address that we're discussing that he trusts the Afghan military. But then we see this incredible reporting from somebody like Richard Engel inside Bagram Airfield that's been left to the Afghan military, but with no power. I mean, tell us about this hole that's been left by the U.S. and how capable they are to fill it.
So the Afghan security forces, parts of them actually are doing pretty well. When you talk about the commandos, the special forces, they've been carrying out their own missions for some time now. They can operate pretty independently. They need a little logistics support, a little intelligence support. They're doing pretty well. The Afghan Air Force, which literally started from nothing a little over a decade ago, they're flying some airstrikes. They're able to maintain a little bit. They have a difficult time maintaining their aircraft, and that's going to be where they're really going to struggle moving forward. But they're doing okay. Where the Afghan security forces really have a vulnerability is with these police and military who are in the more rural areas. So Afghanistan, the central government, for all intents and purposes, really rules Kabul, and that's kind of it. The further you move away from the capital, the less reach they have. So these Afghan security forces that are out in the more rural parts of the country, you know, in the south, in anywhere outside of Kabul, they don't get as much support from the central government as they may need. And that's where we're seeing instances where they're just kind of melting away as the Taliban advance. At times they're handing over their arms. At times the Taliban are even giving them money to travel back home. So that's a real vulnerability. That's why the Taliban have been able to really run over very quickly in some of these more rural areas and take control of some of this territory. The question is, will the Taliban continue to move into Kabul and try to take it? The Afghan security forces are capable enough that they will be able to defend it, but the question is for how long, Savannah?
Right, and you make a great point about that. That was also some incredible reporting we saw from Richard Engel this week with one of those units, those Afghan commandos trained by elite U.S. military units, which was pretty incredible to see. Now, Monica, let's talk back here. There's been some resistance to these plans in Congress. What are we hearing?
Yeah, Republicans have really been slamming the White House, saying that they didn't have a good enough plan for this withdrawal, that it is happening too quickly. There were some concerns even when the president made this announcement from some military experts who said, if you do this, it is likely that the Afghan government could collapse in a matter of months. So that is something that could still happen, though yesterday, again, the president said the fall of Kabul is not something that is completely predictable. It may not happen in the end. But remember, the U.S. and the White House want to point out there will still be a small footprint of troops protecting our diplomatic presence in the country, as well as the Kabul airport, with hundreds more potentially going if that was a decision. But again, this is something that President Biden campaigned on as a promise that he is now saying he is very proud to fulfill. Savannah.
Monica and Courtney, both of your expertises are so appreciated here. Thanks for joining us this morning.
All right, so more than 2 weeks after the Surfside condo collapse, the death toll continues to jump after county officials announced they were transitioning to a recovery operation.
NBC News correspondent Sam Brock joins us now. Sam, good morning. So first, tell us where the death toll stands now. What's the latest update there? But then also, I mean, there are so many families who are still missing someone from their family. What are they saying about the decision to end the rescue operation, effectively hearing from officials that there's no chance that their loved one is alive?
Words you never want to hear. Yasmin, good morning. Good to be with you. In terms of the latest numbers, 64 is the death toll at this point, 76 unaccounted for. And it's worth noting that we've seen about double the number of bodies recovered so far just in the last couple of days, or I should say, it took as many to get to the first 2 weeks as we've seen in the last 2 or 3 days. And I think part of the reason why is simply accessibility. Now that that other tower, the portion of Champlain Tower South that was still standing, is gone, the accessibility is 100% for the crews. And we're starting to see the numbers rise. 64 now, but that figure could easily be at 140 at this time next week. It is crushing and agonizing to think about that and what these families are going through right now. I spoke with Rachel Spiegel, whose mom, Judy, lived here for 4.5 years. She's 65 years old. They love Surfside, so invested in this community, the strength, the sense of love here. And she told me, look, it's not like a light switch. You just turn it on and off, where they tell you we go from search and rescue to recovery. Psychologically, we still want to keep up hope that they're going to find my mom. And I know that if it were me, I would want her to be searching for me beyond just the 2 weeks. So families are having a bit of a difficult time right now trying to process this. And another thing I would add, it's not like with a terror attack, 9/11, where a plane hits a building and it collapses, or on a much smaller scale. If you choose to get into a car and you get in a car accident, they're guilty of putting their heads down on their pillows at night. And this is what happened.
Totally out of the blue. So amidst all of that, and somewhat connected, is folks aren't feeling safe in their buildings right now, in that community, seeing how the Champlain Towers collapsed so quickly and seemingly so out of the blue for so many folks. We had a building in Miami-Dade evacuate just last week. How are some of the nearby towns dealing with some of the safety conditions? What are they finding?
It's a great question. Big picture right now, Yasmin, is the fact that Miami-Dade has ordered an audit. That happened in the immediate aftermath of this collapse for everyone within its jurisdiction to examine the structural integrity of the buildings over the course of a month. But what's happened is some local municipalities have gone faster than that. You mentioned North Miami Beach, which already evacuated 150 plus units in Crestview. That happened last week. And I was speaking with the city manager for Miami Beach, which has the greatest amount of density of any of the cities around here. 5,000 commercial buildings, according to the city manager. She told me of that, about 10% of them, 507, are at some point of this recertification life cycle of 40 years or greater. So they went through and did a cursory look, a visual eye test of all of those buildings and found 15, Yasmin, that were red flagged. 10 of them are occupied right now. They could be evacuated. It really depends whether or not they get assurances from the structural engineers in those buildings in the next couple of days.
Wow. And the thing that you think about is, like, do we really need to wait till 40 years? I mean, we're hearing about all these things that they knew about prior. Sam, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thanks, Sam. Good to see you. So while investigators work to determine the exact cause of the collapse, experts are saying a repealed law could have prevented this catastrophe. A new investigation from NBC News and our Miami affiliate shows that a 2008 law required condo associations to plan for repairs, but it was then repealed 2 years later. NBCNews.com reporter John Shupe joins us now with more on this investigation. John, good to see you this morning. Talk to us about this law, what it required of buildings, and why it was repealed.
Well, in 2008, as you said, a Florida lawmaker named Julio Robina sponsored a law that required condo associations to bring in an expert, an engineer or an architect, every 5 years and tell them how much it would cost to repair any damage. Those things are typically called reserve studies, and they're done by professionals typically. But that law was repealed just 2 years later after Robina left office because of term limits, meaning the law really had no impact. Robina says the law would have been too people told him that the law would have been too burdensome for condo associations, but we haven't found anybody willing to admit that at the time that they voted to kill it.
So how would this law have changed the situation for Champlain Towers and saved lives?
Well, in short, it would have forced that condo association, but all in Florida, to sometime within the 5-year period and thereafter, bring in an expert to tell them all these major components, which of them are looking like they need to be replaced now, if they're going to need to be replaced X years from now, and then come up with the money, start socking away the money to save for it.
All these details emerging now, I'm sure incredibly troubling for the family members of those lost in the Champlain Tower collapse. John Shupe, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.